said yesterday, I'm going to invite my dear colleague and director of CREC to experience the same problems I am experiencing. We are part of the team that has organized the symposium, and we have invited like-minded people. So it's her turn. She's going to present the Anglada Camarasa archive, which is available in the exhibition here at MANAC, the Premeditat archive. I'm gonna be short. Well, that's what I say every time, don't I? Archives, personal archives, are oftentimes premeditated. Artists always says that there's nothing as predefined as a personal diary. And this is the perspective she is going to take. I hope I have introduced you soundly. I'll just say that we need to rethink about the organization. It's just not an option for me to come up right after three amazing speakers. How am I gonna get out of this trap? I hope my presentation is not gonna be too awful. When we started preparing this symposium, we thought about to what extent, archiving tools had to be redefined. At the end of my presentation, I will drop a black spot. Because there are black spots, I thought that in the context of the Anglada Camarasa exhibition, it would be relevant to share some of the decisions that we face when we try to host an artist's archive. In this case is the Anglada Camarasa archive. I understand that Anglada Camarasa is a well-known painter. Barcelona 1881 and Pollença 1959. Anglada Camarasa had to move from Barcelona to Paris and from Paris to the world, and he did in style. He was very successful in the 90s. He was exhibited in all international exhibitions between 1920, when his pictorial career was decaying, when he lost the expansion he experienced at the beginning of the 20th century. Well, the Americans showed interest in him and he started his American career. He was very much valued in America. I love this picture. From the young Parisian Camarasa, he rapidly switched into this more American style with a hat and a cigar. Well, his life was not easy. He lived the First World War, the Spanish Civil War. He had to go into exile. He was a Freemason. He was in exile in Montserrat Monastery, while the painter never went back to Barcelona. He had no pied-à-terre in Barcelona. He was in Barcelona due to an exhibition and he had to flee to Montserrat Monastery, where he departed to exile when the Franco troops penetrated Catalonia. His exile lasted until 1948. He always wanted to go back to Mallorca. He discovered Mallorca in 1808 So he went back to Mallorca in 1948, and there is where he died. The archive arrived. This picture represents the relationship between Camarasa and her daughter. She admired very much her dad. Her name was Anglada Camarasa. She was meant to be called Beatriz Anglada Dwelling, and she wanted to inherit both dad's family names. So Beatriz Anglada Camarasa devoted her entire life to his dad's archive. She donated the archive to the MNAC in 2020, and here comes into the equation Eduard, the curator of modern art. We visited the fund in Mallorca after the family's request to donate the archive, and that is when we understood why Anglada Camarasa didn't want to go back to Barcelona after knowing Mallorca, because he lived in paradise. The Anglada Camarasa archive is a very accessible, tiny archive, a classical archive, yet from the perspective of the archival practice poses certain challenges. I will tell you how we have solved them. The archive is composed by press files, personal documents. The majority of the archive is composed by personal documents, and we have respected the organization of the archive promoted by himself and his family. It was very well organized, so we have maintained the classification. 7 personal notebooks, many process pictures, some albums and graphic materials. Artiers referred to this. Anglada Camarasa loved images. While studying the archive, I could imagine him with his scissors. He would buy magazines to cut and paste images from magazines. There's a significant collection of images and pictures and a collection of catalogs. In this part of the presentation, I will focus on the topic of archiving. At the end of the day, this symposium is about archiving. So one of the main elements that the archive makes us face, someone said that the archive is not dangerous, it's an accessible, user-friendly archive. But the thing is the temporary boundaries or the temporary limits. In archiving, especially when it comes to personal archives, practice says that personal archives start and close with the first and the last document produced by the creator. I'm not going to get into detail regarding the definition of creator, or I would spend all my time. In this archive, we realize that our dear friend Camarasa was born in the 18th century and died in the 19th century, but the last document dates from 2010. So the first limitation when we received the archive is to define the boundaries of the fund. The life of the author. Yesterday there was a remark. Laura Milan said, what they say about me is me. My footprint, my documental footprint also defines me. When they speak about me, it's me. So when the archive expanded 50 years after the death of the artist, because Beatriz had a strong willingness to help him organize his archive, to scratch, take care of the archive, etc. So Anglada Camarasa had 3 wives. in his life. So his third wife, who also helped him produce this archive, because Anglada was aware that he was building an archive, and also his daughter helped him a great deal. So the first thing we decided was, even if our archival practice, well, I would not be invited to a conference to speak about my practices, right? But let's say that the archives ends at 2010, and we understand that the production produced by the family has to be incorporated to the will of the artist.
On this slide, I also want to talk about some aspects that are of interest and that could be good for the debate later. And there's something I am very much concerned about since I work here in the MNAC, and also the fact that I can talk to artists who talk about the archive, and I think, well, this is also archive, and archivists need to make this reformulation. There's the documentation that talk about them, and including all this image is important. There's something I'm concerned about, which is the limit of the will of the artist on its own archive. And this has made me reflect of what we need to include to the archival practice. This will the artist has of making their own archive, and what are the limits of their archives. In the case of Hermen Anglada Camarasa, we entitled the exhibition The Premeditated Archive, as Jorge Blasco said. All personal archives are premeditated because there's this will of doing. But we believe that in Anglada Camarasa, this is very much so and highlighted, because although his first document is in 1971, the birth certificate, it is not insignificant. Well, no one had probably checked his archive when his specialist, the most relevant one, Francesc Bombona and Francesc Miralles, start to study the archive of the artist. We need to remember that we actually were celebrating the centennial of the artist, and there's no doubt in official registries that he was actually born in 1871, but the centennial is celebrated in 1973, however. So there's the importance of this value of documents, this value they have as evidence. Okay, I'm not going to move on to another topic, but there's lots of things happening in the 1900s. Lots of things happens to Anglada Camarasa. After having been traveling around the world for a long time, he comes to Barcelona. He does his second personal exhibition, and that is an absolute success. His paintings on Paris and the lights and the treatment of lights, and this hadn't happened in Sala Paredes, the first exhibition, which basically went unnoticed and no one knew who he was. But in the 1900s we discover a successful Camarasa. Then Anglada Camarasa publishes a short article in the Juventud journal, and nothing else should be studied, because there Anglada Camarasa explains or talks about his painting and what it represents for him, and how the artist is, and how the artist should manage their own work. Everything that happens after that is almost unnecessary. Well, Francesc Bombona does a very good job at it, but Anglada has self-explained himself in the 1900s, and there's another thing that it is very important from the documentary perspective. He goes to an international clipping company that gathers everything that is published in the press on him and his work. So there's premeditation in the sense that he knows he will be successful and he wants to show. So for Anglada Camarasa, the archive is proof of all this, and he does this even with documentary methodology that would not consider an archive document, which are paper clippings or newspaper clippings. So we need to study the role of press dossiers in the careers, basically professional careers of artists, because it's a way of proving what they are and what is being said about them in the press and around the world. After 1900, there's a very powerful intervention. He does his archive. He wants to make the archive. He wants to preserve the proof. There's another important moment, which is the intervention Anglada Camarasa does between 1936 and 1954. Anglada Camarasa organizes his archive. He is in exile after the war, and he is missing Majorca for sure. He starts drafting some notebooks where he wants to tell and record what his work is, and he wants it to leave it as legacy. And in order to do this, he uses documentation where he does a sort of retrospective exhibition on himself, or he tells his family what to do with his works, or what are the ones that are painting photography. And there's another thing he does, which is to organize his archive. He takes all the positives and organizes them. At that moment, especially in 1936 all the way to 1954 and even 59 when he passes away, there's a family intervention as well. There's this accompaniment practice. I'm going to show you, because this is handwritten by Anglada Camarasa, the way he archives. And after this short presentation, I want to talk a bit about the exhibition, so exhibiting, which was also related. One of the things that happened when we received the archive was that Eduardo and myself, well, we knew what we wanted to do. We wanted to put in a museum. But what we didn't want to do was to have a theme park of any kind, or just have a presentation of documents without pace or rhythm. We didn't want to make it boring, in the sense that documents don't have this proximity the works have. But as Jaume explained this perfectly well before, this relationship society has with the works is very different from what they have with documents. So we needed to think what to do with Anglada Camarasa's archive. Obviously, in the exhibition, we include the voice of his daughter, because when she donated the archive at the end of the exhibition, she said, "The cycle of my life has been closed with this donation." So the importance and relevance of the archive is just huge. So what we want to do is to try and show what Anglada Camarasa was for the world, or to the world, because Anglada Camarasa has already been explained. There were some specialists doing that. And we wanted for this expansion of Anglada Camarasa in the world to be able to reflect it with very few items within the exhibition. As Eduardo was saying, Anglada Camarasa shows this map of the world with Catalan artists, and nobody else apart from him could do that. Fortuny and Miró as well, but there's no one who moved throughout the world as he did. So we also prepared the biography through a series, a documentary series, and we think this is the biography explained by Anglada Camarasa. These are the documents that he keeps, and we need to take into account that when people keep documents, they don't keep other things. The artist is keeping what they believe needs to be kept. So this is a biography that could have been presented by Anglada Camarasa himself. So we look for the pace and photographs. The limits of the archive are also interesting in this sense that there's the personal archive, Anglada Camarasa, and family photographs the daughter has. So where are the limits there? This could almost be a community family archive, those limits between what's personal and what's the family, and the documents that the daughter has. she said, well, I can't give him to you. He's my he's my dad. He's not an artist. He's my father. So when faced with the question about what to do, how can we put this archive in a museum, we thought that we only needed to read all the documents in his archive, basically. And Anglada Camarasa's archive is already organized. So what we tried to do was to go beyond this archival organization with a very significant component. This classification of the archive, and then I remember the morning I opened this notebook and I started to read it. I thought there were no personal documents, and personal understood as very intimate of Anglada Camarasa, but when I opened the blue notebook, I got the feeling that this was the most intimate thing the painter could do. Is there anything more intimate than publicly expressing a desire? This is almost like a testament or a will. He says how he wishes his work to be exhibited and what are the classifications he uses for his works out of 5 categories. So this figure, fruits and flowers, landscape, night of Paris, and notes and studies. This is a notebook showing the intimacy of the artist. We would have liked to see the letters Berayort has, through which we know that Anglada Camarasa in 1897 was in Paris already, but we know because he writes to his friends very intimately. But this blue notebook is very intimate and private. This is the will and the wish of the artist, so it's his legacy as well. So what we do in the second part of the exhibition, I'll try to finish in 2 minutes, is to reflect these categories the artist made on his own work. So he left in written format how he wanted the works to be exhibited. And we played around with this archive game, which is the archival classification and the classification the artist makes. The archive could have been organized in these 5 categories, and here we can see it. I was very concerned, and I told Eduard is very optimistic, and he is never concerned. He knew that the exhibition would be really good, but I was concerned by the contributions. What is our contribution? What contribution are we making? And we thought that from the perspective or point of view of the exhibition, we have made some contributions. Some of them are of a high relevance. We knew, for instance, that Anglada Camarasa used photography in his creation process. Gustav Klimt, by the way, who is a figure, a bit of a rival for Anglada Camarasa, in his archive keeps lots of photographs, personal photographs especially, but Anglada Camarasa does not keep personal photographs, but he does have over 500 process photographs. So that's what we used, and we understand that photography in Anglada Camarasa is a hot topic for study, because he is a painter that at the end of the 19th century becomes interested in photography, and we still don't know what his references were and how this had an influence in his work. And then there's a set. Well, Anglada Camarasa collected a lot. Some of the things are in Caixafonum, some of them with the family. And there is a collection of around 300 photographies of Italian classics where we can tell that this is quite relevant in his creation process. Okay, I'm just going to finish now. One more day. I can't open this up because I would need to copy paste, but now this seems like something nonsensical, but back then we were very much concerned about how people would visit the exhibition and how the itinerary of the exhibition would be and things of the sort. the user does whatever he or she wants, and they interpret things as they want, and they end up finding ways of expressing what you are exhibiting. And this is actually out of what your will had prepared. So this is quite a limited perspective at the end of the day. People have a specific use or of what you're exhibiting. So I wanted to talk about this photography, which is related to this external view. We see Silvia Pizarro, the granddaughter of Anglada Camarasa, and myself. She's touching her face and we're laughing. There's a colleague of mine who said, well, you knew how to capture and transmit and communicate the emotion of the moment, but I would like to say that at that moment, Silvia Pizarro is realizing that these images, Italian classic images, she's looking at the Sibilla, enigmatic woman. We don't know where Anglada Camarasa has prepared those colors, and she said, oh my god, how have I never seen this? So we're also contributing these things, and on this link, I'm not going to open it, but there was a user who visited the exhibition, and this is something that I was very stricken about. So he came the other way around. He came into the exhibition the other way around. He wants to know nothing about the itinerary we had set, but he perfectly understands this dialogue we prepare between work and archive or documents of Anglada Camarasa. So exhibiting and archiving, at the end of the day, the user, society interprets all that and uses it as they wish. So thank you very much, and that's the end of my presentation.